Rabbi Lebowitz graciously decided to join us here in the Kollel today. He needs no introduction for the people who are here, whether it's coming from the yeshiva or people from the community who have listened to him. But because he needs no introduction, I think it's covered to give an introduction. Just to say that it's our cover to have Rabbi Lebowitz speaking the Kollel. Rabbi Lebowitz is someone whose Torah, the clarity and the availability of his Torah is such that he's really, I think, one of the great rabbis of Torah of this time, and people very much enjoy listening to his Torah, which is very misameach. And again, it's our pleasure to have him come and share the Torah to the Chaver Kollel with live in the space Medrash for the last 6 weeks, and to all people who are coming.
Thank you, Rabbi Vasky Shlita. It's so wonderful to be with you as I guess this Kollel is winding down, and I'm sure you had a beautiful summer of learning together. And from what I understand, you're learning sugyas in Zvachim in Kodshim. And when I reached out to Rabbi Kaufman and I asked him whether I should give him Zvachim, he said absolutely yes. So I'm not going to do that. But I thought that because it is the time of year where the Beis Hamikdash is on our minds, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about the Beis Hamikdash, but not from a hashkafa perspective, from a very basic halacha perspective. Meaning there is a mitzvah in the Torah to build the Beis Hamikdash, and maybe we would. I thought we would spend a little bit of time discussing that mitzvah in the Torah. Is there? I'll use my watch. Okay. Is that I figured we talk a little bit about this mitzvah to build the Beis Hamikdash. Now, certainly, it seems like a very great mitzvah, and if there was the opportunity to build the Beis Hamikdash on Beis, and there was a fundraising campaign, I'm sure we would all donate as very generously to that campaign. We'd probably donate our time as well to such a campaign. But it's also noteworthy that the Gemara tells us in Maseches Megillah on Daf Zayin, Gadol Talmud Torah Yoser Mibinyan Beis Hamikdash. That as great as it would be to build the Beis Hamikdash, and as much as we anticipate being able to do so soon, to build such a Beis Hamikdash soon, what you're doing right now, what you've been doing over the course of the summer, what most of you do throughout the course of the year, is even in a certain sense greater than Binyan Beis Hamikdash. That is not to say necessarily every time Chazal say Gadol this from that, it does not necessarily mean that given the choice you should choose the one that is Gadol over the one that is less Gadol. For example, Chazal say that there are things that are Gadol from Hatzalas Nefashos. The Talmud Torah is Gadol from Hatzalas Nefashos. So certainly that does not mean that if you're sitting and learning and your chavrusa kills over and you know how to save him, but you're busy learning, that you should just let him go. In the middle of a sugya. No, obviously you would still the halachic obligation would be to save the life. But what it means to say is on some level, the way the Nosikelim and the Shulchan Aruch discuss it in Hilchos Kibbutz Aveim is that on some level, and Hilchos Tzedakah as well, that on some level, if you had two people, one of them spent his entire day learning Torah, and the other one did not get to spend his entire day learning Torah. Instead, he was busy saving lives or busy building the Beis Hamikdash. That if you had to assess at the end of the day who had a better day, who had a more spiritually productive day, on a certain level, Chazal are telling us the one who learned Torah had a better day. He had a more spiritually productive day. So we're going to talk about a great mitzvah, a mitzvah that we yearn for. But at the end of the day, Chazal tell us that the mitzvah that you're privileged to do each and every day, all of the time, is gadol from this great mitzvah that we yearn for, that we strive for, that we hope to be able to fulfill at some point in time. There is a question before we get into this mitzvah: is will this mitzvah ever actually be practical? Meaning, there is a mitzvah in the Torah, the Sefer HaChinuch lists it as mitzvah tzadi hey livnos bayis l'shem Hashem, to build a bayis l'shem Hashem, that we're supposed to build a Beis Hamikdash. The problem with having such a mitzvah is that it seems that the Beis Hamikdash is not necessarily, the third Beis Hamikdash at least, is not necessarily something that we're going to have the opportunity to build. The Gemara in Maseches Sukkah and Daf Namal tells us that Mehera Yibana Hamikdash, discussing why it is that Chadash is Asr Yom Hanef Kulo Asr, We're not going to get into the details of the sugya, but it tells us that Beheri Yibana Beis Hamikdash, and people are going to say, Ishtakid Milo Achalnu Behera Mizrach Hashtanami Nechel. So there's going to be some confusion about when the Chadash becomes mutter. So the Gemara discusses the Ivni Emas. When exactly are we concerned, or do we think that the Beis Hamikdash might be rebuilt? And the Gemara is going to discuss what time of day it's likely the Beis Hamikdash might be rebuilt. Says Rashi on the spot, the Ivni B'Chaves Samach L'Shkias Achama Bihihi V'Kasha De Balayla Inonivna De Kaimla B'Shvuas De Binyan Beis Hamikdash Balayla. You may wonder, says Rashi, that the Beis Hamikdash cannot be built at night. Nor can it be built on Yom Tov. Binyan Beis Hamikdash Docha Yom Tov, because Binyan Beis Hamikdash is not Docha Yom Tov. Says Rashi, Hanimili Binyan Habanoi Bidayada. That would only pose a problem of building Beis Hamikdash tonight, building Beis Hamikdash Yom Tov. How can we do it? Why are we worried that this is going to happen on a Yom Tov? That's only an issue if people were building it. Aval Mikdash Ha'asid Shanu Metzapin Banoi Meshuklalu Yigalav Yavam Mishamayim. But the Binyan Ha'asid, we're not going to have to build it. It's being built, since you're a little kid, you're told every mitzvah you do is another brick, and so it's up there somewhere, and it's just going to come down. It's going to come down min hashamayim. So it could be that we have this mitzvah of Binyan Beis Hamikdash, and according to what Rashi tells us in the Masechah Daf Amalef, there's a mitzvah, but it's never ever going to happen. We're never going to have the opportunity to do this mitzvah because the Kodesh Baruch Hu is sort of doing it for us. And the Tosfos quotes the same thing, that the same idea, that Mikdash Hashem Konli Yodecha, that Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to be the one that builds the Beis Hamikdash. The Rambam in Parakid Aleph Halacha Aleph of Hilchos Malachim does not say that. The Rambam seems to describe that it's not going to descend min hashamayim. Now, it's in the Tefillah of Nachem that we say on Tisha B'Av. It does sound like Rashi and Tosfos that it's going to come min hashamayim. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are going to build it. That it's not that we are building it, but that He is building it. The Rambam doesn't seem to describe that. The Rambam seems to describe how Mashiach is going to come, and Mashiach is going to be in charge of building the Beis Hamikdash. So the Aruch LaNer asks, how can we pray to have a mikdash built if it's already built min hashamayim? And the Aruch HaShulchan discusses that there's a mikdash of guf and a mikdash of neshama. So let's just, for the sake of for argument's sake, for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that somehow, whether it's the mikdash of guf as opposed to the mikdash of neshama, or whether it's that the Rambam is correct, just regardless of how we understand it. Let's assume that there is such a mitzvah, that there's a mitzvah called Binyan Beis Hamikdash, meaning there is such a mitzvah. Let's assume that we're looking forward to being able to perform this mitzvah. What exactly is the purpose of this mitzvah of building a Beis Hamikdash? Why is it? I mean, if we spent every Tishba thus far in our lives mourning the loss of the Beis Hamikdash and yearning for the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, it would seem that we should at least understand why we want it. Right, Rabbi Sablovsky shared recently that he was at that he was at the barber, a non-Jewish barber, and at the barber shop, the non-Jewish barber happens to know all of the dinim of when you are and are not allowed to get a haircut, when Shabbos falls on Rosh Chodesh and the Erev of during Sfira, the barber will say, no, this year it's different. It's Rosh Chodesh. He's an Italian, he doesn't know, but he knows the dinim that are nogea to him, right? He has a mitzvah Talmud Torah for the dinim that are nogea to him. So the barber said right before the 3 weeks, he said to Rabbi Sablovsky, he said, I know it's the temple. The temple was destroyed. It seems like it's been at least 5-6 years since the temple was destroyed. I've been in business over here for at least 5-6 years. So Rabbi Zabowski said, you ready to have your mind blown? That emoji, you're ready for this one? It's been a couple of 1,000 years since the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, and we're still mourning it. And when we mourn the Korban Beis, it stands to reason that it's part of our responsibility to try to figure out what it is that we're looking for, what it is that we want back. What was the primary purpose of the Beis Hamikdash? What will be the primary purpose of the Beis Hamikdash? It's important we should speak of the Beis Hamikdash not only in past tense but in future tense as well. I've often shared the story when my oldest son, before his bar mitzvah, I brought him to Eretz Yisrael, and we took a tour around the old city of Yerushalayim, and the tour guide pointed to the Har HaBayis, And he said, you know what that is? You know what's over there? And my son said, yeah, that's where the Beis Hamikdash is going to be. And the tour guide said, wow, that's the first time anyone ever said that. They always say that's where the Beis Hamikdash was. It happens to be, it's not so plush that that's where the Beis Hamikdash is going to be, but that's a different discussion for a different time. You have to learn Yecheskel Be'iyun to try to figure that out. But it's that's the way we should be talking about the Beis Hamikdash, about something that is not only past tense, but it's future tense as well. So what's the purpose of having this Beis Hamikdash? So the Rambam describes in the beginning of Hilchos Beis Hamikdash, mitzvahs to say lasos bayis laHashem muchan lios makrivim bo karbanos. That we need to have a bias, because without the bias, we're not going to be able to bring all the karbanos. And you have so many mitzvahs about karbanos in the Torah. You have so many karbanos that we have to bring. So part of the primary purpose of Beis Hamikdash is so that we're able to do the avoda. In Sefer HaMitzvos, Mitzvah Seichaf, the Rambam writes that he should tzivanu livnos bayis la'avoda. That at least I think the Frankel edition has it like that. That it's a mitzvah for us to build the bayis la'avoda. That the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is to be able to do the avoda bo yeh hakrava v'avaras heshtamid ve'lov tiyah alicha v'aliyah l'regel v'hakivutz b'kol shana. And we'll go there, we'll gather there, we'll be able to bring karbanos there. Now, this makes the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, the famous Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, all the more stunning, right? The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, which there are a lot of kashas on it, where he seems to describe karbanos as like a b'diavad kind of situation. Right? The Rambam seems to describe that karbanos are like our response to Avodah Zarah and to the way the Avodah Zarah worship. So we need to do it in a different way, in a better way. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is talking to us on our level, considering what we've been exposed to. So this would be a little bit troubling. That the whole idea of building Beis Hamikdash is just so that we can have karbanos, but the karbanos themselves are really only a b'diavad. But that Rambam is difficult for other reasons and requires explanation. Now, what's the raya for the Rambam? So first of all, I mean there are lots of rayas, but Yerushalmi in the second paragraph of Maseches Brachos, Yerushalmi tells us Amar Shmuel ben Nachmani Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeDavid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to David HaMelech that Yom Maleim Ani Monulach Eni Monulcha Yomim Chaserim Klum Shlomo Bincha Bona Beis Hamikdash Lo Lahakriv Bo Karbanos. What was the purpose of Shlomo HaMelech wanting to build the Beis Hamikdash, or succeeding in building the Beis Hamikdash? Isn't it only to bring karbanos? Chaviv halai mishpat utztaka shatal seyosem min karbanos. And the mishpat and tzedakah that you do, David, is more valuable to me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, than all the karbanos that Shlomo HaMelech is going to bring. But the Yerushalmi seems to be describing that why is the Beis Hamikdash so valuable? Again, aligned with the Rambam, that it's lo lahakriv bo karbanos. Isn't the entire purpose about bringing karbanos? So that's on the one hand. If Shitas Rambam, which makes a lot of sense, why do we need Beis Hamikdash? What are we yearning for? So all these mitzvahs in the Torah, you spend a whole summer learning that tzvachim. So when do we get to do it? So we are only going to get to do it when we have the Beis Hamikdash. So when we're going to be able to, and then, by the way, there's a menachos also, and there's a lot. Kachim is a lot. Remember one summer I went to visit Rav Shechter in Tannersville, and it was, I think, the summer when he and his wife celebrated, I think maybe it was their 50th anniversary. So the family got together, all the children and grandchildren got together. They decided as an anniversary gift, they're going to divide up all of Shas, and they're going to finish Shas for as an anniversary gift for Rabbi and Rabbi Shechter. But there were a few Masechtas that weren't taken, so they gave it to Rav Shechter. So he took Zvachim and Menachos. So we went to learn with Rav Shechter. We said, okay, what are we learning? He said, I got to learn Zvachim and Menachos. We got to finish over here. So we learned Zvachim and Menachos. It's a good summer's work to learn all of Zvachim and Menachos. But there's a lot to do. We got to bring a lot of karbanos, so we need a Beis Hamikdash for that. So the Ramban says, no, the Ramban seems to have a different take on this. The Ramban in Parshas Truma says that the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash, l'chein sivat chiva dvar hamishkan, describes the Mishkan. Will, for the sake of this conversation, we'll assume it's one and the same. We'll assume that the purpose is one and the same. That Shielo Bayis B'Tochem L'Kudot L'Shmo B'Sham Yedaber Moshe Yitzades B'nei Yisrael B'Nei Ikra Chayfetz B'Mishkan U'Makom Menuchas HaShechina Shua Aryeh. That the whole purpose of having a Mishkan or a Mikdash is a place to have a Hashras HaShechina. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants a place to reside in this world, to put a concentrated sense of Kedusha There's Shechina in a lot of places in this world. There's Shechina whenever 10 Jews get together. There's Shechina in a lot of places in this world. But this very, very concentrated sense of Hashras HaShechina, and to have that concentrated sense of Hashras HaShechina, that comes it comes from the Makom HaMikdash. And it makes sense that in the context of the CBY that you have in the Torah, building a Mishkan, you have building the Aron together with it. That the Aron is mentioned right together with it. That makes a lot of sense because according to the Ramban, that's what it's really all about. This probably relates to the idea of davening toward the Makom HaMikdash on both levels. Meaning on the Rambam level, if the Mikdash is Makom Karbanos, Tefillah is if the Mikdash is the primary purpose of the Mikdash is the Karbanos, and Tefillah is Keneged Tmidim Tiknun. The Tefillah is our form of Karbanos, so it makes sense that as we're davening, we face the Mikdash. And according to the Ramban, if Tefillah is an encounter with the Shechina, Tefillah is an encounter with God, it's conversation with the Shechina, so also it makes sense that you're going to face toward the Makom HaMikdash. The Ramban may have trouble explaining, though, the second Beis HaMikdash, right? Because if the whole idea is Hashras HaShechina, the whole idea is a sense of HaKadosh Baruch Hu putting this concentrated level of Hashras HaShechina in this place. Well, in the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Aron v'Kaparas. So there was that's where the Shechina really emanated from. So, and yet we had this Mikdash. So Rav Weiss explains in one of his pieces in Minchas Asher, I think on Sefer Shemos, he says, what you have to say is, the Ramban would agree to what we alluded to before. Hashras HaShechina is not a yes or a no. It's not an on-off switch. It's a dimmer, right? Meaning there's a higher sense of Hashras HaShechina and a lesser sense of Hashras HaShechina. Va'after shleimus binyan abayis bios kvod Hashem chofif alav umalios atamid bios aron ha'edus b'tvira mutzla kitikuno. And even though when it's on full blast, when Hashras HaShechina is on full blast, that's with the aron, and that's the Beis Hamikdash with the aron and the kaporos and shnei akruvim. But even when that's taken away, Rahman al-Islam, we still have some level of Hashras HaShechina. And he says, and don't think I'm making something up over here, because after all, Kol Beyasara Shechina Sharia. Like we alluded to before, whenever you have a minion of people, the Shechina is there. Afilu Yachid Shalosik Batorah Shechina Imo, the Mishnah Gergiavos tells us. The Shechina is there in different levels, in different madrigos. The Gemara Bava Kama Ein Shechina Shorel B'Shnei Alafim B'Shnei Revavos MiYisrael. So for some things you need 22,000 Jews for Shechina. For sometimes you say 10 Jews, sometimes just one Jew learning Torah. Yeah, it's all true, depending on how high the dimmer is, how high it goes, how strong that Hashras HaShechina is. Now, if we're going to draw these two shitos. And put it in that way, that you have this shitas harambam, shitas ramban. It's worthwhile to look at how they count the mitzvos of building the Beis Hamikdash and building the Kelim in that context. If you were to look through the different Rishonim as to how they describe the mitzvos of building the Mikdash and the mitzvos of building the Kelim that filled the Mikdash, you would find that there aren't two shitos. There are in fact 4 different shitos in terms of describing that. The Rambam Sefer Mitzvos Mitzvah Chav, when he describes the mitzvah to build the Mikdash, the Rambam writes that it's one mitzvah to build the Mikdash with all of the kelim. Right now I'm not finding the lashon here, but it's somewhere here. The Rambam writes that it's to build the Beis Hamikdash together with here it is. The mitzvah esrimi shetzivanu livnos Beis Avoda, to build the Beis Avoda, and that's where there's going to be hakrava and havara, etc. And he goes on to describe that that all of the kelim are included in this mitzvah. That they're all included in this mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash. In Chaschinuk wasn't sure what the Rambam held because he didn't have a copy of the Sefer HaMitzvahs, but in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam makes it pretty clear that it's all one mitzvah. And it makes plenty of sense that the mitzvah is about building a mikdash and it relates to all of the kelim as well. Because the purpose of mikdash is avoda, and if the Rambam learns that the purpose of mikdash is avoda, anything that facilitates the avoda is all pointing in the same direction. The mikdash and the kelim, they all accomplish the avoda. So the Rambam writes, Binyan Beis HaBechira mitzvah b'fnei atzma. Binyan Beis HaBechira is its own mitzvah. וכבר בארש זה הכלל כולל חלקים, ושהמנורה ושולחן והמזבח וזולסם, כולם הם מחלקי המקדש. All of Mikdash, meaning if you were to just build a big empty room, that's not Mikdash. Mikdash is a room that has all the kelim that are necessary in order to be able to do the avodah. So no surprises in the way the Rambam describes the mitzvah, right? That it's a mitzvah of Mikdash and kelim all together. The Ramban, on the other hand, describes the construction of kelim as a hechsher mitzvah for their own avodah. And why do I need a menorah? So that I can do the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. Why do I need a shulchan? Because I can do the mitzvah of being mesadeh the lechem abanim on the shulchan. Each kli, you need to build the kli, not because that's the definition of mikdash. You need to build the kli because there are mitzvahs that you're supposed to do with each of these kelim. Except for the aron, which has no avodah. There's no avodah that you do with the aron. It's just its very presence. And therefore, the aron is counted as a separate mitzvah to build the aron. The Ramban writes, "Below hukshar be'enai hatam shekasa ba'arav shamar sheim chelet michelkei hamikdash." I don't think the Rambam is right, says the Ramban, that building the kelim is part of binyan hamikdash. V'yisheina kelim chelet min habayis. What do the kelim have to do with the bayis? The bayis is the mikdash. The kelim are not the mikdash. The kelim are something else. Aval him shtei mitzvos. Ve'in ma'atvu su'asu. You can bring the korban in the Beis Hamikdash even if there's no shulchan and even if there's no menorah, you're still able to bring korbanos to the Beis Hamikdash. So what does that have to do with anything? So the Ramban seems to understand each kli is the building, the construction of each kli is a hechsher mitzvah for whatever you plan on doing with that kli. So the Rambam and the Ramban seem to track pretty nicely with what we would expect. What's fascinating is that, and the Rabbi Sadigon happens to be a third sheet, or Sadigon holds that each kli is its own mitzvah, building each kli is its own mitzvah. We're not going to get into that. What's fascinating is the Ravid in Sagos to the Sefer Mitzvah Sakatzer, trying to figure out what the Ravid's take is on the din of building the kelim. So again, so far the Rambam and the Ramban track probably more or less how you would expect them, what you would expect them to say. Comes along the Ravid in the Sasagos, and he says, I don't understand how the Rambam can leave out binyan hamizbeach avanim shlemos, how you can leave out the mitzvah of building a mizbeach. Apparently, the way the Ravid understands is that building a mizbeach is an independent mitzvah. He says, you want to talk about the other klei hamikdash as part of binyan hamikdash? Fine. The other klei hamikdash could be part of binyan hamikdash. But binyan hamizbeach, that warrants its own mitzvah. That warrants its own mitzvah to build the mizbeach. Now, that's a troubling question. What's the Ravid asking on the Rambam? We know from a Rambam perspective, if anything, if you had to pick one kli that certainly is part of the mitzvah of binyan hamikdash, you would definitely say it's the mizbeach. That's the focal point of avodas hakarbanos, right? That's where the zrikas hadam happens. That's where. So you would imagine the mizbeach would be critical for the Beis Hamikdash itself, and therefore be incorporated into the Beis Hamikdash according to the Rambam. So what's the Ravid bothered with? So Rav Shachter writes in Ginas Egos. Rav Shachter writes in Sefer Ginas Egos the following. He writes, this is in Simin Nun Gimel Os Dalu. He quotes Sefer Mitzvos Rambam, Livnos Beis Habechira, and includes the menorah, the shulchan, the mizbeach, the zulasam. Hasagas haravid, lama hiniach livnos mizbeach. How could he not have a mitzvah of livnos mizbeach? And the Kesef Mishnah wonders about this Ravid. What do you mean? How could he leave it out? The Rambam counts all of the kelim in the mikdash. Why is the mizbeach different than anything else? So Shachter suggests the following. He says maybe the Ravid is coming from a Ramban perspective. The Ravid is not coming from a Rambam perspective. As follows. The Ramban writes, as we said before, Mitzvah Say Daf Lamed Gimel, that we don't count Asiyas HaShulchan, HaMenorah, VaMizbeach as separate mitzvahs, nor do we count them as part of the mitzvah of binyan hamikdash, because each one has its own requirements to do with them. Meaning you need a shulchan so that you have what to do to be mesadeh lechem apanim, take lechem apanim off. There's what you're supposed to do. You have a menorah so that you can be madlik menorah, mated the neiros, and do the things that you're supposed to do with a menorah. And therefore, the Ramban understands when it comes to those kelim, you're not going to have a separate mitzvah to build those kelim because the kelim are meant to serve a certain function and to enable one to do the mitzvahs that are associated with them. As opposed to, says the Ramban, the Aron and the Kaparas, there's nothing for them to do. There's nothing, you don't do anything with the Aron and the Kaparas. It's just there. It's the centerpiece. It's where the Kedusha starts and the Kedusha emanates from. But that's why the Ramban counts the Aron and the Kaparas as a separate mitzvah. Not like the Rambam understood that all of it is just part of the mitzvah binyan Hamikdash. So says Rav Shechter, Umayata Yanirli B'das Aryeh. Therefore, I think what the Rabbi means is that the Rabbi really holds partially like the Ramban. That we don't count making a menorah and lighting it as two separate mitzvahs. The below menorah, leko b'chlal chovas hadata. The kolek mitzvah hadata, yilakayim b'menorah es mitzvah. Without a menorah, you don't have a mitzvah sadaka. The mitzvah sadaka is only if you have a menorah. Now you got to do what you're supposed to do with the menorah. It's always questionable, right? Meaning, whenever there's a mitzvah that requires a circumstance in order to do the mitzvah, so do you have a chiyuv to create the circumstance? Do we call it a mitzvah to create? Before Shemitah, there are these organizations that send out that you could buy an amma by an amma somewhere in Eretz Yisrael. So you'll own a tile in someone's living room in Tel Aviv or something, so that you could be yotzei the mitzvah of resting your karka during Shemitah, because otherwise you would have been plowing through that tile in Tel Aviv. But it's Shemitah now, so now you're gonna. But I happen to not own real estate in Eretz Yisrael, because as much as those real estate guys keep coming, it's still $1.4 million, right? So I happen to not own it. So, but for a couple of $100, I could own, for the sake of Shemitah. So is there an inyan in that? Am I supposed to do that? Am I supposed to go and buy in order that I could then be Mekayim the mitzvah of Shvisas Haaretz during Shemitah? Okay, what to discuss? There's a lot of discussion in the poskim about that. Rav Asher has a tshuva and then Minchas Asher on Shvius, but over here says Rav Shechter, the whole purpose from a Ramban perspective, from a Rabbi perspective as well, of the menorah is to then do the mitzvah that you're supposed to do with the menorah. The shulchan, we don't count making a shulchan and then doing what you do with the shulchan as two mitzvahs, as two separate mitzvahs, to arrange the lechem apanim on it. Why? To call yisod achiv shalechem apanim hainu l'kayim b'ashulchan as mitzvah. So the whole purpose of the lechem apanim is to do what you're supposed to do with the shulchan, to place the lechem on the shulchan. So therefore, it's all mitzvah achas. But says Rav Shechter, b'nogei l'karbanos. When it comes to karbanos, even without a mizbeach, the mitzvah is already there. Meaning, when I woke up this morning, did I have a chiyuv to bring a karban? So the answer is yes. And maybe this relates to the Talmid Rabbeinu Yonah about Neshama Parts Vasenu that we're mekayim the mitzvah by reciting the karbanos. But when I woke up this morning, did I have a chiyuv to light the menorah? There's no menorah, so I have nothing to light. I didn't have a chiyuv to arrange the lechem apanim because there's no shulchan, so I have nothing to arrange. The mitzvah is tied into the kli when it comes to the shulchan, when it comes to the menorah. The mitzvah of karbanos is not tied in to any single particular thing. It happens to be that I cannot bring karbanos in the conventional way without a mizbeach. But the mizbeach and the karbanos are not the same mitzvah. It's not that when I bring karbanos, now I did what you're supposed to do with the mizbeach. That you could then taina that it's all chad mitzvah. He says, and that's the Ravid's hasad. The Ravid is attacking the Rambam from a Ramban perspective. The Ravid is saying, I see the world the way the Ramban sees the world. I see it that the mitzvah of binyan Beis Hamikdash is not necessarily about avoda. That the mitzvah of binyan Beis Hamikdash might be about hashpras hashchina. And therefore, there's a separate mitzvah of building, there's a separate mitzvah of doing each avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, and each avoda is tied into the kli that you do that avoda with. But when it comes to mizbeach and karbanos, the connection is not as tight. The chiyuv of karbanos is there even without a mizbeach, even though you can't actually carry out that chiyuv without a mizbeach. And that's how Rav Shechter explains the taina of the Rabbi. So it turns out that there may be significant nafkaminas between these different approaches about what the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is. So again, just the chazor what we did to this point. So far, all we said was, we'll probably say in 2-3 sentences, is that Shitas HaRambam is that the purpose of the mitzvah of Binyan Beis Hamikdash is karbanos, avodah. Shitas HaRamban, purpose of Binyan Beis Hamikdash is Hashras Hashchina. Hashem wants a place to be. We pointed out that the difficulty with Ramban, what do you do about Bayisheni when there was no Aron? So we said, the dimmer switch is a little lower, but it's still a place of Hashras Hashchina. We pointed out that there are 4 different opinions about how this relates to about how to relate to the chiyuv of building the different kelim in the Mikdash. And the Rambam says exactly what you'd expect him to say. Building all the kelim is part of the Binyan Hamikdash. It's part of the mitzvah of Binyan Hamikdash. Why? Because the whole Mikdash is about avodah. You do the avodah with the kelim, it's all the same mitzvah. The Ramban says more or less what you would have expected him to say, that no, Binyan Hamikdash is one thing. Each kli is tied into what you do with that kli. And then we had this perplexing Ravid where he says, Rambam, I understand why you don't want to count separate mitzvahs of building everything else, but the Mizbeach deserves its own mitzvah. So Rav Shefta explained that the Ravid is coming from a Ramban perspective, that each kli is connected to the avodah that you do with that kli, save for the Mizbeach, where the connection between the karbanos and the Mizbeach is not quite as tight. So my nafkamina between the Rambam and the Ramban. So one nafkamina might be, if let's say you build the Beis, right? You build the Beis Hamikdash, and you have not yet filled it with kelim. Have you finished the mitzvah yet? Right? Is the mitzvah complete at that point? Rav Asher Weiss quotes from the Lev Sameach in Sefer Mitzvah Shorosh Yud Beis, where he says there's no mikdash without kelim. That's the Shitas HaRambam, that there's not going to be such a thing as a mikdash without kelim. That's when it comes to the mitzvahs asiyah. Now, it could be that the mitzvahs of avodah can be done without kelim, but if it's all defined as one mitzvah, maybe the mitzvah asiyah cannot be done without kelim. Can you make the kelim at night? Right? Ein binyan beis hamikdash b'layla. But are you allowed to make the clay hamikdash b'layla? So if it's part of the mitzvah of binyan beis hamikdash, so then you cannot make the kelim at night. But if it's not part of binyan beis hamikdash, then one can make the kelim at night. So it's just a little bit of a perspective on this great mitzvah that we yearn to do of binyan beis hamikdash. But I just want to conclude with one more point. Once we have a Beis Hamikdash that should happen b'mehera, we then have another mitzvah called Shmiras Hamikdash. We then have to protect that Beis Hamikdash. This past summer in Camp Kaylee, it's still in the summer. Last month in Camp Kaylee, we were zocheh to have a number of great Talmidei Chachamim come and give shiurim to our masmidim. We're so grateful to Rav Neuberger for taking the time to speak to the masmidim about Inyanim of Kibbutz Avim. We were learning this summer. One of the Talmidei Chacham that came to camp was Rav Yonason Sachs, and he spoke about Shmiras Hamikdash. He spoke a little bit about the mitzvah of Shmiras Hamikdash. I'm not going to go through his whole shir right now, but I want to bring home the point that he tried to that he expressed. The beginning of Maseches Tamid, the Gemara asks, "Minahani mili," that it's necessary to engage in Shmiras Hamikdash, that one has to guard the Beis Hamikdash, which is such a strange question because it's a pasuk in the Torah. V'shamruas mishmeres al mo. It says that you're supposed to cherish and nurture and preserve the kedusha and the tara. You're supposed to be shomer the mikdash. So, if the question was perplexing, the answer is even more perplexing. Because the Gemara doesn't say, Shanamar, open the Chumash, look in Parshas Korach, it's right there. The Gemara doesn't even quote the pasuk in answering why it is Minolan, that we have a din of Shmiras Hamikdash. So the Gra in Maseches Tamid explains that of course the mitzvah is explicit in Parshas Korach, but that's talking about the Mishkan. If one were to think about it, the Mishkan was not at all fortified. The Mishkan was a very temporary type of place. Security in the Mishkan, they didn't have, like all shuls have. When I was going to say a kid, when I was an adult, you used to be able to walk into shuls whenever you want and sit and learn. Now, you have to know the code, you have to pass the bechina on the front door, where's the fourth sefer and how many avos are there, right? Shvatim, I don't know, or we count Medrash. So you have to pass all the bechina. But it used to be, you could walk right in. It wasn't a shul was like the least fortified place. A Mishkan was not a fortified place. It could easily be penetrated. So obviously there was a need that you had to safeguard. The Mishnah in Talmud, though, wasn't talking about the Mishkan. It's talking about the Mikdash. This is a binyan kavua. There's a place that had locks. They can lock it at night. There's a mitzvah l'daros to protect it, but it's a fortified structure. It shouldn't require shmira. So the Gaon writes that that's the menahani mili of the Gemara. And the Gemara says that there's a separate chiyuv l'daros even for the Beis Hamikdash. Why? What's that chiyuv l'daros of shmira on a place that's already fortified? So that's the chiddush. The Rambam spells it out explicitly. That the purpose, the Rambam writes in Paraches of Face of Chira and Sefer Mitzvahs Mitzvah Beis, that the purpose of Shmiras Hamikdash is mishum kavod hayis. That ain't a doma paltarin shein aleim shom paltarin sheish aleim shom. That it's legadlo lechavdo leromima. That it's not about protecting. It's not about the knowing how to protect it. It's about showing that this is worthy of protection. It's legadlo lechavdo leromima. The Perush Harash in the beginning of Maseches Tabit says that the mitzvah is belayla and not b'yom of Shmiras Hamikdash. Why? In order to make sure that we never mesiach das from the mikdash, that we never let the fact that there is a mikdash escape our national attention. That the Jewish people have to be paying attention to the Beis Hamikdash constantly. There can't be a time where it's just not on our minds, where it's just something that we're not thinking. So during the day, you can't not think about it. There's avoda going on, but b'layla there's no avoda. So it's very easy to be in Mesiach Das. Specifically b'layla, there's a chiyuv shmiras hamikdash so that there not be a hesach hadas. The Mishnah said that they would have youngsters that have children, pashtus, who would be involved in the shmira of the mikdash. If it were about protection, it would be reckless to have children. Imagine you go to the front door of your shul on Shabbos morning. Instead of that GI Joe looking guy with the with the vest and the gun and everything, so you have 5-year-old sitting there with his reckless. But if it's about showing reverence, we want to demonstrate that the entire tzibur of Knesset Yisrael is all involved in that. It's a chiyuv for all the Klal Yisrael. So who represents Klal Yisrael? Everybody represents Klal Yisrael. This is that's the mitzvah of Shmiras Hamikdash. And it's a critical lesson because it's not only about Mishkan and Beis Hamikdash. It means that whenever we have an enhanced sense of Kedusha and Tahara, we have a requirement to safeguard that Kedusha and Tahara in our lives. If you have Kedushas Yisrael, we need to protect Kedushas Yisrael. And we do that by Sur Meira and by Asay Tov, right? That's Zola Yikra Bo. But also legato, lechavdo, leromim, to have proper reverence for that which is kadosh, for that which is holy, for that which is great. And much of the Torah that we learn, to be able to remember Torah, to be able to recall the Torah that we learn, to be able to actually acquire, to make a kinyan on Torah that we learn. It's not just a natural thing. It's a lot of siyata d'shmaya and it's a lot of effort, but part of it is to value. Meaning when things are important to you, you remember them. It's not only, it is largely about how much you chazer it, because you want to go back to chazer things that you love and that you adore and that you value a great deal. But it's also even the first time. If it's something that you're yearning for, that you're striving for, that you want, that you're so thirsty for, you process it even the first time in an entirely different way. So much of becoming a great Talmud Chacham is about ahavas haTorah, even more than natural genius. Look, natural geniuses, it's true, have an advantage over the rest of us, but they don't have the whole advantage. I was reading a little bit about Rav Gustman because we're supposed to give a shiur on Tisha B'Av afternoon, and they asked me 3 weeks ago what I want to talk about, and I don't know. A month in advance, I have no idea what I want to talk about. So I said, I don't know, I'll wake up that morning, figure out what I want to talk about. So they said, no, we need a topic. So I don't know what I was thinking. I said, well, talk about Rav Gustman. I have no idea. I'm just going to get up and read the article. I said, if anyone has any ideas of what exactly I should do, so I was doing a little bit of research. So I was reading a little bit about Rav Gustman. So apparently I mentioned this in a different shiur, and then in another shiur I was giving, someone came over to me with a brand new Hebrew biography of Rav Gustman. He said, it's not yet out, but this might help you. So I was reading it a little bit last night, and it was describing Rav Gusman's relationship with Gedolei Yisrael, and how it is that it wasn't just Reb Chaim Eiser, that he was in his Beis Din when Reb Chaim Eiser, when he was 19 years old, or 21 years old, whatever it was, when he was a dayan in Reb Chaim Eiser's Beis Din, and the famous story, Reb Chaim Eiser and all the Rabbanim in Vilna stood up for him when he was doing it. It was everybody, every Gadol Yisrael he connected with. And they asked him, how did you? He said, because that's what I prioritize. I had a tremendous, I still do. He said, tremendous love for Gedolei Torah, the Gavla, the Chabdo, the Romama, that to elevate those who learn Torah, to elevate the value of Torah and the value of those who master Torah. So we should be zocha that Ezras Hashem this year to whether HaKadosh Baruch Hu will decide whether it's going to come down Min Hashemayim or we're going to be able to perform this mitzvah on our own. But we should be zocha to be able to participate in this mitzvah in whichever way, whether it be through appreciating that sense of Hashras HaShechina that the Ramban is talking about, or whether it be through being able to do all of those mitzvahs HaTorah that describe the karbanos, like the Rambam is describing, but then to cherish it, to be able to have it, to cherish it, to be shomer on that mikdash. And perhaps part of the way that we're able to do that we're able to convince HaKadosh Baruch Hu that it's time, is when we show HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the kedusha you've already given us, we have appreciated. We know it, we've been cherishing it, we've been legadol, lechabdol, l'romimah, and we're ready for more. We're ready for a different sense of kedusha. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees that the kedusha that He's given us, the kedushas haTorah, the kedushas Yisrael that He's given us, is not something that we're protecting properly, and He's not going to be super interested in upping it to a higher level of kedusha, to opening up new avenues of kedusha. But when we appreciate a kedusha space on Knesset, a kedusha space on Medrash, a kedushas Yisrael, our own kedusha, the kedusha of other Jewish people, the kedushas haTorah. When we appreciate kedusha and we're lechavdol, the romama, we elevate kedusha. Kodesh Baruch Hu should see that we're ready for new avenues of kedusha, and He should open up those gates wide for us before this competition.